Hi everyone, this is Yana Smakula. Welcome back for another Yippee For Yana episode. Today I am resharing a video that I filmed for Simon Says Stamp for their YouTube channel featuring a gorgeous Festive Bouquets stamp set. So let's jump right in. Today I'm doing some Christmas coloring with the new Simon Says Stamp Festive Bouquets stamp set. Now this is a gorgeous floral stamp set with 2 large floral clusters and some beautiful sentiments. I started to work on my card by stamping the larger floral cluster in Memento Tuxedo Black ink. This ink is alcohol marker friendly, and I will be coloring my image with Copic markers, and these are alcohol markers. I'm doing my stamping on the Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and I'm using my larger Misty for this. I replaced the black foam pad inside my Misty with the grip mat from Waffle Flower, and this is the first time I'm using the grip mat, so I'm just testing it out in my larger Misty. I do have the grip mat inside my smaller Misty, inside my mini Misty, and I love it. And I thought it was time to use the larger mat in the larger Misty. Now that I have my image stamped, it's time to do some coloring. I decided I wanted to do some flick style coloring to really have detail on my petals. At first, I opted to use 4 colors of markers, 4 shades of red, but I later removed one of the colors. I didn't use the R24. So I only used 3 colors. I started with the R39, then used the R27, and finally used the R22. Now with the flick style coloring, basically you add flicks of color onto your paper. So you do not saturate your paper with ink like you would when you do the normal type of coloring that you do with Copics. With the flick style coloring, you are basically just flicking the color onto the paper. I'm sorry you can't really see much of the flicking movement. You can't really see a lot of what I'm doing here because my hand is blocking the tip of the marker, but I am holding my marker at the very tip and I am basically adding flicks onto my petals. I am adding flicks from both the base of the petal and from the tip of the petal because I want just the center of the petal to remain lighter. So I've added my darker flicks, my darker color. I'm now coming in with my medium color, the R27, and once again, I'm flicking that color onto my petal, and now I'm coming in a bit further into the center of the petal, and then I'm using my lightest color, the R22, to fill that petal in. I do want to have a bit of white left on my image. I don't want to color the entire petal. I want there to be a highlight, and by leaving a little bit of white here, by not adding color to the entire petal, I'm creating that beautiful natural highlight. So go ahead and use this technique to apply color to all of the petals. Here I've zoomed in quite a bit to show you real time how I'm doing my coloring. As you can see, I'm holding my marker and I'm carefully adding flicks of color. I'm using the stamped lines as a guide to tell me where my flicks need to go, where my darkest color needs to go. The darkest color indicates the shadows on the petal, and then I fill in the rest of the space with the medium red and then with a lighter red to color my petal. I'm using reds here, but you can color these flowers using other colors. These don't have to be red. They can be pink, they can be white, they can be purple. Just color away. Next, I'm using several green markers to color the greenery on this image. First, I'm going with a G99, and once again, I'm adding flicks to the pine needles. Now, the pine needles are a different type of image. You don't have an outline. You just have black stamped lines. And what I do here is I follow those black stamped lines, and I add my flicks of color over those lines. So I do have my color going outside of these stamped lines, but I think that adds a lot of interest and detail to this image, especially to the pine needles. I'm using another green color combination to color the leaves here, and I'm using G99, G94, and YG03. And I'm basically using these to color some of the petals a more cheerful green. You can see how this green compares to the green on the pine needles. And lastly, I'm using the same reds to color the berries that I have on my floral clusters. I will come in later, once my coloring is done, I will use a white pen to come in and add some white highlights, some white dots onto the berries. And I'll also use a white jelly roll pen to color the flower centers on my flowers. I'm just finishing up some of the coloring that I have here using the rest of the green markers. And with my coloring done, I was looking at this image and I did not quite like all of that white space, blank space in the center. To me, it just looked odd. It looked unnaturally white, unnaturally bright. So I thought to myself, I need to add some color to those sections, because if your images, if you have a floral cluster, if you have a floral arrangement, you don't really have a bunch of white gaps in your floral arrangement. You can see a color of the background, or you can see some more leaves in the background, so it's not white. So having that white color looked very unnatural here. So I used one of my darker greens, the G99, and I basically filled those white areas with green. At first, I did a solid layer of color, but then I decided that instead of doing that, I kind of need to go a little bit more organic and just flick some green color onto those sections, just so that I have some darker and some lighter areas, some highlights and some shadows. And I feel like that worked a lot better than just adding a solid layer of color. So even though I don't have an image there, I don't have anything in particular stamped in that section, I just added some flicks, and that helped finish this image. Now let's go back to the flower centers. On some of the larger flowers, I was able to skip coloring over the flower centers, over the stamens, but on the smaller flowers, I wasn't able to do that, and I actually colored those red. So I used my white jelly roll pen and I colored those white. You can use your jelly roll pen to color over an image. The pen is opaque and it will color over a marker or over, ink blending or colored cardstock. So I love using this pen to add in flower centers to my card or to add some nice details. At first, I thought about using a yellow marker, and I did use a bright yellow for my stash, but I didn't quite like that. So even though I used the yellow marker, I then went back with my white pen and I recolored those yellow flower centers. Now this stamp set has a coordinating die available, and that makes all the difference. Here I used my coordinating die to cut this floral cluster out, and oh goodness guys, look how beautiful this is. I mean, it's gorgeous. You put it on a card and your card is done. You don't really need much else or anything else to add to it to make a beautiful project. I thought about creating a background. I thought about what supplies I could use to make a background for my card, and I came across these color blends papers from Simon Says Stamp. Now, these have been around for quite some time, but honestly, I've never really used them before, and I felt like this was the time to give them a try. So here I have one of the new packs from Simon Says Stamp, and I'm just testing different backgrounds to decide which of these blended backgrounds would work better. I really like that green one. It worked well with the greenery on my background. I also like the other green one quite a lot, but you'll see that I settled on the teal one in the end. Now the color blend paper is glossy. It is very beautiful. It has that beautiful ombre blend. So you have a little bit of the darker color on one end and lighter color on the other end. And it just looks beautiful. It looks like an ink blended piece of paper, but something that's ink blended perfectly, flawlessly. And it's done. It's there. It's ready for you to go. It's ready for you to use. You can use it as a background. You can die cut it. I'm sure you can do other things with it, and you'll see me doing some experiments on this paper in just a second. So I thought about a sentiment for this card. At first, I wanted to use a sentiment that is included in this stamp set, but I kind of wanted to do something different. So I decided to try foiling on this paper. Foiling usually works fabulously well on glossy cardstock, so I knew that foiling a sentiment here would work perfectly well. In fact, sometimes foiling works so well on glossy paper that you can even get quite a bit of over foiling because of how well the glossy paper grabs onto the foil. Here I'm using a Glimmer Hot Foil Sentiment set. This is from my Christmas collection with Spellbinders, and this is called a Merry Little Christmas Sentiments. And I'm just using one of these simpler sentiments here. It reads, "Sending you the very best wishes for a joyful holiday season." Now, at first, I thought about using matte black or opaque black foil to foil the sentiment. Since I do have my image stamped in black ink, I kind of felt like doing the sentiment in black would be a good idea. But I later changed my mind and I decided it was time to use a little bit of gold. I don't have gold happening on this card. Nothing else is stamped or done in gold, but I kind of felt like using gold foil was a better option than using black. After all, black is not the most festive color, and this is a festive card. It's a Christmas card, so of course I wanted to add a little bit of additional festiveness to this project. I used the gold foil, and I also used my hinge method to attach the Glimmer Hot Foil Sentiment onto my background. I used the Spellbinders Best Ever Craft Tape, but you can use any other low-tack tape that you have in your stash. I did remove some of the tack from that tape by sticking it onto my hand a few times. Glossy paper is notorious for being very easy to grab onto things. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So sometimes if you stick low-tack tape onto glossy paper, it might be a little bit more difficult to remove it from glossy paper versus other types of paper just because of how smooth that paper is. So here I have my Glimmer Hot Foil system. It is hot and ready to go. And I'm just going to place my background plate with my glimmer plate and my foil onto the glimmer, press the timer button, and wait for the Glimmer Hot Foil system to heat up my plate and transfer that beautiful foil. I also have my Platinum 6 die cutting and embossing machine all set and ready, and I just need to wait for that timer to stop flashing before I can send this through my machine to foil. It only takes about a minute for the plate to get hot enough to transfer the foil, and we are now ready to take this out of the docking station and send it through our die cutting machine. With this type of floral cluster, you can do any type of sentiment you want. You can stamp and die cut a sentiment. You can add a foiled sentiment like I'm doing here. If you have the better press system, you can do a better press system. You can also die cut a sentiment and add that onto your card. The sentiment is really not the focal point. It's that beautiful floral cluster that is the focal point on our project. So here I have my sentiment created, and I love the way this looks. It's time to assemble our card. Here I have an A2 side folding card base. I have my background panel, and I also have a scrap card base. So I have some card bases in my stash that are made from textured cardstock, and textured cardstock is not something that I really use or like. So I'm kind of using these scrap card bases as a means to add a little bit of dimension to my projects. So I have trimmed that scrap card base to be just a little bit smaller than my front panel, and I use that to pop my front panel onto the card. When I do foiling, the heat from the hot foil machine tends to warp the panel just a little bit. It doesn't warp it quite as much as when you do heat embossing, but you can see that the panel bends just a little bit. So I like to add a little bit of extra something behind my panel when I adhere it to a card base to help flatten it. So hence why I'm using that scrap card base behind my background panel. Now it's time to adhere our colored cluster, and here I'm using foam adhesive squares. I'm just adding a bunch from the back of my colored cluster, and I'm going to adhere that in the center of my background. At first, I thought about placing it to the right or to the left. I kind of felt like that was a nice design, nice placement for this card, but I didn't want to crop this image. You know, this image is so beautiful. It is such a fantastic focal point. I really did not want to cut it in half. So I figured I'm going to place it right in the center of my card and hope that I don't need to trim much of it. So I added foam adhesive squares. I've placed it right there in the center above my sentiment, and I love the way this looks. I did have to cut just a little bit off, just little ends of the petals, little ends of the leaves, but I think that's okay. I did not have to trim much of it. Lastly, I'm using the Simon Says Stamp sequins. I have these new confetti gumdrops from Simon Says Stamp, and I absolutely love the colors in this set. The colors are very pastel, they're very soft, and I feel like they go really well with my color blend background. So I'm adding just a couple of embellishments here and there, and that finishes my card. So here's a look at the project I have for you today, created with the Simon Says Stamp Festive Bouquets stamp set. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you feel inspired to create. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time.